Good morning, dear learners, and once again, welcome to the MOOC on Economics of Gender and Development. And we are in week 7, and this is module 24 of the MOOC course. And this module is titled Women and Work Comparative Analysis. So far in this course, we have tried to highlight two basic roles of women in economy and society. One is the reproductive role, which is essential to fulfill the future manpower needs of the society, and the other is the productive role, which serves as one of the indicators of gender empowerment. So, in this way, a woman being productive in economic sense, that is, having some gainful engagement, also is an indicator of women empowerment. So, higher rate of women in work in the economy in a macro sense may mean a better scenario of women empowerment. However, many other underlying debates are there, due to which the phenomenon, as we have already stated, may not hold good. Higher participation of women may not necessarily lead to a better scenario of women empowerment. And in the previous module, we have already came across the discussion of women in the labor market. There we discussed many related issues affecting women participation in the labor market. And in the next two modules, this module and the next module, we shall try to analyze female work participation rate, FWPR, and also the female labor force participation rate, FLFPR, as important indicators of gender empowerment. So in this module, we shall try to derive a broader understanding of these two concepts, and we shall also take up a comparative analysis among the developing economies with particular reference to India. And in the next module, we shall try to highlight the female labor force participation rate or the female workforce participation rate in terms of the major economic sectors and activities with an aim to undertake a state-level analysis within India. So regarding female work participation rate and gender empowerment. Female work participation rate refers to the proportion of women engaged in economic activity, whether in paid employment, self-employment, or unpaid family work, relative to the total female population of the country. It is a statistical measure that captures the extent to which women are actively contributing to the economy through work. Its significance as an indicator of gender empowerment lies in the fact that participation in work reflects women's access to opportunities, resources, and decision-making power. A higher female work participation rate suggests that women are not confined to domestic roles, but are visible in the public sphere, contributing to economic growth and asserting autonomy. However, female work participation rate must be interpreted critically. Many women are engaged in low-paid, informal, or subsistence work, which may not necessarily translate into women empowerment. Structural barriers such as wage inequality, occupational segregation, and lack of social security often dilute the empowering potential of mere participation. Thus, while FWPR is a useful indicator, it should be complemented with qualitative measures of work conditions, earnings, and rights. While discussing the concept of female work participation rate, another seemingly similar concept, namely female labor force participation rate, may often create some confusion in us. So let us understand the distinction between the two. As we have already discussed, female work participation rate measures the proportion of women who are actually engaged in economic activity, whether employed in formal jobs, self-employed, or working in family enterprises. So it reflects the share of women in the economy who are currently working. On the contrary, female labor force participation rate, FLFPR, is a much broader concept in scope. It also includes both women who are working and those who are unemployed but actively seeking work. In other words, it captures the proportion of women who are part of the labor force, whether employed or unemployed. So the key distinctions between the two can be summarized as follows. Okay, and here in table we see the key distinction between FWPR and FLFPR. Okay, what it measures? The FWPR measures the share of women actually working, while FLFPR measures share of women in the labor force. So who is counted? In FWPR we only count the employed women, and in FLFPR we count both employed plus unemployed but seeking work. So why this difference matters? A country may have a relatively high FLFPR but a lower FWPR. if many women are seeking jobs but cannot find them. Okay, this is very important to note. So conversely, FWPR alone may give a misleading picture of empowerment if women are concentrated in low paid or informal work. This is also equally important to note. And analyzing both together helps policymakers understand not just how many women are working, but also how many are willing and able to work but face barriers to employment. So FWPR, in a way, is a subset of FLFPR. The gap between the two highlights female unemployment or underemployment, which is crucial for assessing gender equity in labor markets. However, many other related issues like nature of work, whether it is voluntary or distress driven, whether the work has social safety net or not, whether the work is well paid or not, many such issues are there to actually assess if participation of women in work is actually leading to women empowerment or not. Okay, this we have already discussed. And in our subsequent discussion, we shall try to capture these issues. And in the subsequent discussions, in this and also in the next module, we shall use both this concept, FWPR and FLFPR, okay, basically based on available data. Now let us discuss the relationship between FLFPR, female labor force participation rate, and economic development of a country. Economic theory suggests a U-shaped relationship between FLFPR and GDP per capita, the extent to which this holds across different income groups remain a subject of debate. Structural shifts, legal frameworks, and socio-cultural factors all interact to influence women's workforce participation at various stages of economic growth. While high income and upper middle income countries exhibit a clear U-shaped FLP trend, lower income nations show weaker relationships, suggesting that economic growth alone is insufficient to drive significant improvements in female employment. The U-shaped hypothesis posits that FLFPR initially declines as economies transition from agrarian to industrial structures before rising again in developed economies. This trajectory is driven by structural changes in labor markets, shifts in gender roles, and evolving social norms. In agricultural economies, women participate in the labor force at high rates due to the subsistence nature of farming and family-centered work. However, as industrialization progresses, traditional gender roles become more entrenched and employment opportunities shift toward male-dominated sectors, leading to a decline in female labor force participation rate. Over time, as economies move toward service-based industries, women's educational attainment increases, and legal frameworks supporting gender equality strengthen. And thus, the FLFPR begins to rise again. So, high-income nations tend to exhibit the expected U-shaped pattern where women's participation in the workforce initially declines but recover as the economy matures. However, in many low and lower middle income countries, the anticipated female labor force participation rate recovery is often weak or absent due to persistent socio-cultural barriers, inadequate legal protections, and limited employment opportunities for women. For example, in a study conducted by Henry Tam in 2011 reveals this U-shaped pattern in which the author tried to examine the U-shaped relationship between feminization of the labor force and real GDP per capita by using a panel data of about 130 countries from 1950 to 1980, applying a dynamic panel data estimation technique. And the result of the analysis has been shown graphically with the help of figure 1. Okay, here you see a U-shaped pattern, okay, of female labor force participation rate and also economic development in the cross-country data for the period 1960 to 1980. Now let us discuss the female work participation rate in India. Women's participation in India's workforce is paradoxically low despite economic growth, characterized by a significant gender gap, a heavy concentration in low-paying informal jobs like unpaid farm household help, and challenges from social norms, safety, and lack of opportunities. Though recent trends show slight upsticks in formal sector's work and policy efforts. Key issues include a high proportion of women working without wages in family enterprises, low formal sector inclusion, and a need for better social protection, impacting overall economic potential. India has generally observed low and often declining female work participation rate in past decades, particularly in rural areas. Though recent data from the PLFS Periodic Labor Force Survey in particularly 2020 to 23 and 25 shows an upward trend. It is driven largely by rural women entering agriculture and service sectors due to economic needs, though urban participation is rising too, supported by government schemes like Skill India and initiatives promoting formal sector inclusion, education, and childcare facilities. This growth reflects both policy success and potentially distress driven entry, with ongoing efforts to boost formal employment and address barriers for women. Based on PLFS data from the July to September 2017 quarter, this is the first PLFS quarter, to October to December 2022, last quarter of which PLFS data were available, it is seen that there is a seasonal pattern to female workforce participation in rural areas. Women tend to enter the workforce during the peak season and withdraw during the lean seasons. But in addition, figure 2 clearly shows the uptick in female work participation rate in rural areas in the 2019 July-September quarter. The rise in the urban female work participation rate is less dramatic but also present. The quarter-on-quarter rate of GDP growth fell from 7.1% in the April-June quarter of 2018 to 4.2% in the July-September quarter of 2019. And at first glance, it may seem paradoxical that employment rates should rise at a time when growth is slowing down. The explanation lies in the type of employment that was being generated. What these women who entered the workforce do? A similar quarter-wise analysis of the type of employment is shown in figure 3. Note the steady rise in the share of self-employed women. This is accompanied by a fall in the share of both casual and regular wage work, and no such clear pattern is seen for male workers. And as noted by Dhamija and Chawla in 2023, even within the category of self-employment, it is the share of unpaid workers, also known as contributing family workers, who have grown faster. And here we see the figures. Figure 2 shows the workforce participation rate for women, and in figure 2 we see the women are largely entered self-employment and moved away from wage work. And these figures are from the State of Working India 2023 report. So let us undertake a comparative analysis of female work participation rate in India and in other developing countries. FLF figures have been quite heterogeneous, rising strongly in Latin America and stagnating in many other regions, while improvements were modest in the Middle East and female participation even fell in South Asia. In Latin America, factors have been conducive to greater female participation include a female education expansion in post-secondary education, typically associated with high labor market attachment, continued fertility decline, increasing independence of women's labor in few white-collar services than elsewhere due to a strongly growing service sector and a sizable manufacturing sector, which is seen in some countries, this offering opportunities for women. And in East Asia, it appears that a growth strategy depending heavily on female labor in manufacturing, strong female labor market attachment, irrespective of household conditions, which we see in China and Vietnam, also due to the socialist legacy, and low fertility enabled continued high female labor force participation. And the recent decline from these high levels, driven by China, may be related to rising household incomes, an increasing care burden, and a fading of the socialist legacy. In sub-Saharan Africa, agriculture is still the mainstay of total employment, and strong female involvement there leads to high participation rates. In addition, it appears that household conditions do not play a strong role in affecting female participation, but segregation into few sectors and occupations might also constrain female participation in non-agricultural sector, especially in countries lacking a sizable manufacturing sector. And in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the legacy of socialism that promoted female participation is slowly fading, with women facing increasing difficulties combining children with employment, leading to declines in female participation from high levels, especially in Central Asia. And when we see the Middle East and North Africa, we will see that a combination of a strong stigma for educated women against working outside of white collar jobs, services, remaining legal barriers to some types of female employment, and a stagnant or only slow growing public health and education sectors has ensured that a strong education expansion as well as fertility decline has only had a rather modest impact on female participation rates. And this we found in World Bank studies. And this is particularly the case in resource-rich countries, but these are prevalent everywhere. And in countries where export-oriented manufacturing and tourism play an important role, such as in countries like Morocco, Tunisia, and Turkey, female employment opportunities and participation are somewhat greater. And in South Asia, female labor force opportunities are generally much more circumscribed. Household conditions matter. The expansion of education and economic growth has freed many women from being forced to work to ensure the survival of family, while employment opportunities in favored white-collar services jobs have not grown commensurately with the supply of educated women. Moreover, employment in many other sectors are stigmatized for the educated women. And across South Asian countries, there are important differences. For example, in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, the household constraints on female employment seem weaker than in India. Moreover, the sharply growing textiles and garment sectors in Bangladesh, and to a lesser extent Sri Lanka as well, has enabled educated women to work outside of white-collar services, providing substantial economic opportunities for women. Conversely, in India, the lack of an export-oriented manufacturing sector, combined with falling female employment opportunities in agriculture, has led to a increase of female employment opportunities and participation. And this we can see in figure 4. Okay, in figure 3 we see the global map. Okay, it shows the labor force participation rate in India and also in other countries. Okay, here we see different groups of countries in different parameters. Okay. Now, when we undertake a state level analysis of female participation in workforce in India, here the spatial pattern of female workforce participation rate across states in urban and rural areas is shown in figure 5. And here we see that while broadly the female work participation rate continues to be higher in the southern, western, and northeastern Indian states as compared to the northern states, there are significant departures from this known stylus fact. Focusing on the urban rate, note that the relatively high rates in Tamil Nadu, Chhattisgarh, and Himachal Pradesh stretches across the north-south extent of the country. On the other hand, as expected, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Jharkhand emerges as the states with the lower rates of participation of urban women. Unemployment trends to be higher for women compared to men across most of the states in India. But note that some of the same states which display low rates of female work participation rate also registered high rates of female unemployment. Okay, in Rajasthan and Bihar we see this. And this indicates a generally unfavorable environment for women to be employed in these states. Please note that in the next module also, we shall examine state level variations in female work participation rates across different economic sectors. Here we are just considering the macro scenario. And here in figure 5, you see the female workforce participation rate in rural and urban areas across Indian states for the work 2021-2022 2, and this is from the report State of Work in India 2023. So does India exhibit U-shaped female participation in the workforce, like we have seen in a global context earlier in the model? There is a statistically significant U-shaped relationship between GDP and the female labor force participation rate. We have already discussed this. And that is, a female labor force participation rate tends to be higher in poorer and richer countries compared to those in the middle or low-income countries. However, there is also a huge amount of dispersion, especially for poorer countries, indicating that a lower level of GDP factors rather than income are important determining the level of women's participation in the labor force. Recent data shows that in India, there exists a U-shaped relationship between female workforce participation and husband's income. Okay? In the next, we explain this relationship. So, explaining the relationship between female labor force participation rate and husband's income, we see that particularly in urban India, there is a strong evidence for the income effect in the form of the U-shaped curve that we find for the husband's earnings, particularly in urban areas. Okay, let us consider figure 6. Okay, and this is also from the State of the Working India Report 2023. Okay, so here in the right panel of the figure, which is showing the urban data, okay, you see that there is a U-shaped pattern. Okay, and it shows a U-shaped pattern in relationship between husband's earnings and probability of women's employment. Let us come to the summary of this discussion. So far we have. So participation of females in the workforce is an important indicator of economic development. While high income and upper middle income countries exhibit a clear U-shaped FLFP trend, that means female labor force participation trend, India shows weaker relationships, suggesting that economic growth alone is insufficient to drive significant improvements in female employment. And recent data shows that in India, there exists a U-shaped relationship between female workforce participation and husband's income. Women's participation in India's workforce is paradoxically low, despite economic growth characterized by a significant gender gap, a heavy concentration in low-paying informal jobs like unpaid farm or household help, and challenges from social norms, safety, and lack of opportunities, though recent trends show slight uptick in formal sector work and policy efforts. Although recent trend shows an uptick, but it is below the global average. Constraints on women's freedom and autonomy, and therefore female labor supply continue to play an important part in the story. However, the role of weak labor demand cannot be discounted either. Female labor force participation rates, FLFPR, have been quite heterogeneous, rising strongly in Latin America and stagnating in many other regions across the space, while improvements were modest in the Middle East and female participation even fell in South Asia. Across South Asian countries, there are important differences. In Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, the household constraints on female employment seem weaker than in India. And in India, the lack of export-oriented manufacturing sector, combined with falling female employment opportunities in agriculture, has led to a shrinkage of female employment opportunities and participation. The spatial pattern of the female workforce participation rate across states in urban and rural areas continue to be higher in the southern, western, and northeastern Indian states as compared to the northern states. Unemployment tends to be higher for women compared to men across most states of the country, and the states which display low rates of female work participation rate also registered high rate of female unemployment. And this we see in the states like Rajasthan and Bihar. And this indicates a generally unfavorable environment for women to be employed in these states. So with this, we come to the end of this module. Thank you.